I was holding my bouquet when my phone buzzed in my hand. The doors behind me were open, the music had started, and everyone was standing. Everyone except my mother. Her message waited for me on the screen, short, calm, almost polite. "We will celebrate you later." I read it twice, hoping my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe I had misread it. Maybe it was meant for someone else. But the words remained. Later, I looked at the front row again, empty, my father's seat. My sister's seat. Every seat that should have held my family was bare. Asterisk, I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not call anyone. I just stood there, clutching my bouquet, breathing slowly while the word later hammered itself into my mind. Later, a single word. Yet it carried the weight of everything I had hoped for on this day. Later meant they chose something else over me. Later meant I was not important enough to show up. Asterisk, my name is Emily, and in that moment, something inside me shut down quietly. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with a cold, heavy realization that my family had decided my wedding was optional. Asterisk, I walked down the aisle alone. Guests tried not to stare at the empty seats, but I could feel every gaze moving back and forth. I smiled anyway, because that was what I had been trained to do. Protect the image of my family. Smile even when it hurts. Asterisk, the ceremony passed like a blur. I said my vows, felt my husband's hand hold mine, tried to focus on him, not the absence behind us. The applause felt muted compared to the silence at the front row. No one had arrived. I laughed when I had to, smiled when necessary, while recording the feeling in my mind piece by piece, like evidence for later. Asterisk, at the reception. Whispers followed me. "Where is your family? Are they coming later?" I deflected with a polite shrug. I protected my mother without even thinking about it. I shielded her absence from everyone else while inside. A quiet storm started to grow. Asterisk, that night, after everyone left, I listened to the voicemail my mother had sent an hour before the ceremony. Her voice was calm, soft, almost cheerful. Something important had come up, she said. A family opportunity. She said I would understand. We would celebrate later. I deleted the message halfway through, unable to finish listening to her excuses. Asterisk, weeks passed. Not a word. Silence, deliberate and heavy. Not a single apology. Not a single acknowledgement. That silence was not accidental. It was a test. If they waited long enough, they believed I would forgive, forget, or pretend nothing happened. Asterisk, I tried to move on. I focused on my marriage, on building a new life. I laughed with my husband, went through routines, tried to feel normal. But every time I looked at the photos from that day, the empty seats screamed back at me. Asterisk, then the truth slipped out. Not from them, of course. From a cousin who assumed I already knew. She said casually, almost laughing, that my parents had chosen a business dinner over my wedding. Investors, people with money. A decision made calmly, quietly, prioritizing appearances and opportunity over their own daughter's milestone. Asterisk, that was when pain turned into clarity. It was not an emergency, not illness, not accident. It was a choice. Later had not come to fix anything. Later was simply convenient for them. Asterisk, I did not confront them. Not then. I did not scream or demand explanations. I observed. I watched. I waited. Patience became my weapon. Silence became my strategy. Asterisk, my mother eventually called. She spoke about trivial things. Her garden. My sister's new job. She laughed. She acted as if everything were fine, as if later had already repaired the damage. She did not ask how I felt. I answered politely, calmly, with nothing extra. No emotion, no reassurance, no signal that I was broken. Asterisk, I noticed patterns over the next few months. My sister's events were never missed. My milestones were always flexible. Later was used whenever my feelings could be dismissed. I stopped sharing details of my life unless necessary. I kept screenshots of messages where my feelings were minimized. Saved emails where my words had been ignored. I began quietly building a ledger invisible to them but precise, for a day that would come. Asterisk, around month 6, a family group chat appeared. A big event was coming. An anniversary celebration. Everyone was invited. My mother added a heart next to my name. A small gesture meant to smooth over months of neglect. Asterisk, I read it, then read it again. I could choose peace. I could type a polite yes and restore appearances. Walk into the event, smile, and pretend. My finger hovered over the screen. I imagined myself at that gathering. The relief. The smiles. The closeness. The temporary forgiveness. Asterisk, but I remembered standing at the end of the aisle alone. Holding flowers that suddenly felt heavy. Reading a message that told me I could wait. Remembering later. And I knew peace that required submission was not peace. Asterisk, I deleted the group message. I did not respond. Not yet. I watched. I waited. Asterisk, every reminder, every call, every voicemail became part of the evidence. My dad calling to tell me it would hurt my mom if I did not attend. My sister asking if I was being dramatic. The word dramatic cut deeper than absence ever could. My love for them made me doubt myself. It almost made me forgive too soon, but I did not, months of quiet patience had taught me control. Observation had taught me timing. And I had learned that revenge did not have to be loud. Revenge could be deliberate, precise, delivered at the perfect moment. And I would wait for that moment, weeks after I deleted the group message. The silence from my family continued. No calls, no questions about my life, no acknowledgement of the wedding they skipped. It was as if pretending I didn't exist was easier than facing the truth. Every reminder, every birthday, every small milestone I shared online went unnoticed by them. And that hurt more than their absence at my wedding ever could. I started paying attention to patterns I had ignored before. My sister's accomplishments were always celebrated. Every award, every promotion, every minor success had them present, clapping, smiling, taking photos. But me, I learned quickly that unless I announced something spectacular, I could be invisible. Even my marriage, my most important day, had not been enough. Then one evening, I received a forwarded email from my mother. It was an invitation to a distant cousin's engagement party months away. She added a note, "Hope you can join us. We'll be happy to see you, happy see me." Such simple words, yet after months of neglect, they felt heavy with expectation. I didn't respond immediately. I thought about it for days. I imagined walking into that room, smiling, pretending everything was fine. The warmth of familiarity, the relief in their faces, the easy laughter, none of it would be real. I imagined my mother noticing my absence and having to explain, and a quiet smile curled in my mind. It wasn't spite. It was strategy. I had learned over months that waiting, observing, and letting them reveal their own priorities could be more powerful than confrontation. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, every casual dismissal was now part of a map. I knew exactly how they valued me, and I was learning exactly how to use it. Then came another text from my sister a week later. "Are you really still upset? You're being dramatic." The word dramatic hit differently this time. Earlier, it would have cut me, made me doubt myself. Now, it fueled something else, clarity. They didn't understand. They assumed I would forgive, assume, or excuse. But I wasn't going to play that role anymore. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of messages where I was dismissed, emails where my feelings were minimized, even text exchanges with extended family where my name was overlooked. Every single detail became part of a quiet ledger, invisible to them but vivid in my mind. Each entry added weight to the moment I would finally act. Months passed. I watched silently as my parents continued with life, unaware that I was building something they could not see. I learned their habits. I watched how they treated others versus me. I took mental notes of what mattered to them and what did not. It was almost like conducting an experiment, quietly, meticulously, knowing that the results would speak louder than any words I could say. Then one day, a casual comment from a relative tipped me off to something bigger. My parents had mentioned my wedding casually at a dinner, almost laughing. They had explained it as a small scheduling issue, as if skipping my wedding was no big deal. The tone, the casual laughter, the lack of acknowledgement, it all became fuel for what I was planning. I realized that they had never actually expected me to withhold myself, to not respond, to sit in silence while they assumed everything would be forgiven automatically. And that realization brought a small, quiet thrill. The power had shifted, just subtly enough that they didn't notice yet. My husband noticed a change too. He asked me gently if I was holding onto anger. I told him it wasn't anger. It was strategy, patience, observation, quiet planning. He understood that I wasn't seeking revenge in a loud, destructive way. I was simply letting the situation unfold, letting them reveal their own misjudgment. The next invitation came unexpectedly. A family reunion. Everyone was going. My mother added an extra note next to my name. "We would love to see you there, Emily. It's important to us, important." A single word, and yet it carried months of assumptions, dismissals, and underestimations. I didn't respond immediately. I waited, as I had been doing for months. Each day added pressure, each passing moment made my eventual decision heavier, more impactful. The anticipation wasn't just mine. I knew, instinctively, that when I finally acted, it would be noticed, remembered, and felt.
And slowly, a quiet determination formed. A determination not just to succeed, but to do so in a way that my father could not anticipate, could not ignore, and eventually could not resist acknowledging. a determination to shift power not with noise, shouting, or rebellion, but with the inevitability of results, with the slow, certain accumulation of proof that he had been wrong. Asterisk, every small success became a brick in a wall I was building, one that would eventually separate his expectations from my reality, and ultimately invert the hierarchy he had constructed. Asterisk, by the time I graduated high school, my acceptance into a reputable university was more than just an academic achievement. It was the first step toward rewriting the story he had always controlled. And yet, as I packed my bags, the lessons of favoritism and invisibility stayed with me, quietly shaping the way I would approach the next stage, a stage where the power would shift completely. And he would finally stand across from me, waiting for an answer that only I could give. Asterisk, college was supposed to feel like freedom, but for me it was a revelation in discipline. Asterisk, for the first time, no one in my immediate family controlled the narrative of my worth. No one was there to dismiss my effort, belittle my ambitions, or compare me to someone else. The world outside our house didn't care that I'd been invisible for years. It only cared if I showed up, prepared, and executed. Asterisk, I chose a major in finance, not because it sounded prestigious, but because it made sense. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't play favorites. They simply reflected effort and logic. I spent late nights in the library, not seeking approval, but building knowledge. I worked part-time at a local cafe, tutoring sessions after classes, and somehow I managed to maintain a near-perfect GPA. Each dollar I earned, each scholarship I applied for, each project I completed quietly became a stake in my independence. Asterisk, meanwhile, home remained the same chaotic imbalance. My sister had started her career, a small art business my father deemed charming but non-essential, and my parents were, as usual, invested in her world. Their energy, their emotional labor, their money all seemed to flow toward her ventures or her dreams. I didn't envy them. I analyzed it. I cataloged how patterns of favoritism created opportunities for some and constraints for others. I had no interest in competing for attention. I wanted leverage, not approval. Asterisk, it was during my sophomore year that the first hints of my future power shift began to take root. I landed an internship at a small Manhattan investment firm. Nothing glamorous, no fancy titles, but the work was real budget analysis, small-scale portfolio management, understanding the mechanisms behind money movement. And for the first time, I realized that I could build influence quietly, without needing validation from anyone who had doubted me. Asterisk, back home, things were unraveling slowly but predictably. My sister's fledgling business required constant parental intervention. My father, despite his dismissive nature toward me, would enthusiastically lend advice and financial support to her ventures. I learned through side conversations and overheard phone calls that he was overcommitting resources, draining savings, and mortgaging confidence to sustain what he perceived as her potential. Asterisk, I kept myself distant but observant. Every misstep, every overextension, every assumption of loyalty to his favorites was cataloged. I noticed, for instance, that whenever a project of hers faltered, my parents' worry levels skyrocketed, their schedules adjusted, but I was invisible. I realized something crucial. Power isn't about noise, charm, or even loyalty. It's about control over resources and knowledge. Asterisk, by the time I reached my senior year, I was managing multiple projects, tutoring, interning, and building a small portfolio of investments from my savings and scholarships. I wasn't just surviving. I was creating momentum that no one at home could touch. Each statement, each transaction, each calculated decision became a brick in the foundation of a life where I was the architect. And they had no blueprint. Asterisk, then came the inevitable news. My sister's business had hit a rough patch. My parents, predictably, turned to my father's guidance and my mother's unwavering support, throwing money at a venture that was failing. I stayed quiet, observing. Their overcommitment wasn't just financial, it was emotional. They were entangled in a web they couldn't see clearly. My advantage wasn't cruelty. It was preparation. I was building a life independent of their chaos. Asterisk, after graduation, I secured a full-time analyst position in Manhattan. The moment I moved into my first apartment, I realized the depth of my freedom. I wasn't just living for myself, I had leverage. Leverage in knowledge, in financial security, and career trajectory. I began to understand something my father had never taught. Respect is earned by results, not by who you are expected to be. Meanwhile, my sister's business collapsed entirely within a year. My parents, as always, were first to rescue her. They took out lines of credit, dipped into retirement funds, sacrificed sleep and sanity to patch a failing dream. My father's tone remained unchanged when I called occasionally, mild surprise, casual judgment. He didn't notice my own life thriving because he didn't bother to look. And that was fine. I didn't need him to notice. I only needed them to underestimate me further. Each mismanaged loan, each frantic intervention for my sister, every sigh of my father's as he counted spreadsheets with one hand and juggled a mortgage with the other, it was all data. It was all proof that the imbalance of recognition and opportunity at home had created vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities that I quietly and patiently was learning to control. By the time I settled into my position at the firm, I had 3 things my father had never understood: financial literacy, strategic patience, and a detachment from approval. I had learned to build value quietly, to accumulate power invisibly, to become indispensable without showing off. And deep down, I began to realize something I had known for years. The sentence that haunted my adolescence, "You'll never amount to anything," wasn't a verdict. It was a challenge. And challenges, when measured correctly, could be turned into opportunities. The foundation of my life was complete. The bricks had been laid quietly, meticulously, and irreversibly. All that remained was for the moment to arrive, the moment where I would stand across from my father, look him in the eye, and let him see the reality he had long refused to acknowledge. The moment when the balance of power would finally shift. It was a rainy Tuesday when I first saw the cracks in the carefully maintained facade of my parents' world. I had just finished a late meeting at the firm, walking through Manhattan streets slick with water when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice, usually composed, carried a tension I hadn't heard in years. "It's Tyler," she said, almost in a whisper. He needs help again." I took a deep breath. Tyler, my older brother, had been chasing one dream after another, each promising more than the last, each one unraveling faster than I could process. I had been keeping track from afar, noting the patterns: impulsive decisions, overconfidence, reliance on my parents' resources. And now, yet again, the fallout had arrived. When I drove out to New Jersey the next day, the house was in disarray. Stacks of unopened bills, late notices from banks, and the kind of nervous energy that comes when people are desperate for solutions lined every counter. My father sat at the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, the weight of responsibility etched deep into his face. My mother hovered over him, wringing her hands, muttering reassurances that sounded more like prayers than plans. Tyler was nowhere to be seen. When he finally appeared, it was with the same casual bravado he had carried for years, a box of half-baked ideas and a smirk that suggested the world owed him a second chance. "It's just a rough patch," he said. "I'm figuring it out." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, the full scope of his reliance on us became stark. My parents had spent years bailing him out, draining savings, leveraging retirement funds, and exhausting patience. And yet, every failure was somehow never his fault. My father's dismissive glances toward me became more pronounced. Here I was, thriving in my own life, yet ignored in every conversation about responsibility. I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I didn't offer unsolicited advice. Instead, I surveyed the situation like I always had, quietly, calculating, absorbing the vulnerabilities in their financial and emotional scaffolding. I opened a small notebook, jotting down balances, interest rates, repayment schedules. I ran numbers in my head as I sipped my coffee, piecing together exactly what it would take to keep the house afloat, to prevent foreclosure, to stabilize the chaos my brother had created. My father, noticing my focus, finally said something. You've always been practical, Madison. Maybe you could help." And I began to notice something else, something I hadn't expected, a subtle change in their language. Where once they had dismissed me, now they referred to plans I implemented as Madison's suggestions or her idea. Not gratitude, not acknowledgement, but a creeping recognition of influence. The shift wasn't loud and it wasn't celebrated. It was quiet, almost invisible. But it was real, Those words, casual as they were, struck me differently than any praise he had withheld. They weren't validation. They were a recognition of capability he had ignored for years. And in that recognition, a seed of power planted itself. I realized that I could intervene not as the child who had been dismissed, but as the person who understood leverage, numbers, and strategy far better than anyone else in that room. Over the following weeks, I coordinated quietly. I arranged meetings with financial advisors, mapped out budgets, calculated mortgage options, and even explored alternative housing solutions for my parents. Solutions that would secure their future without endlessly bailing Tyler out. Each plan I proposed was precise, airtight, and framed in a way that left little room for misinterpretation. But home dynamics were sticky. My mother clung to the fantasy that Tyler would succeed, that one last chance would fix everything. She thanked me for my help in passing, never acknowledging that the strategic framework I created was what would actually prevent disaster. My father, too weary to assert himself, leaned on my plans like crutches, yet never seemed to realize that the responsibility and insight came entirely from me. It was during one evening, after all bills had been reviewed and a path forward agreed upon, that I felt a quiet shift. My parents were starting to understand that the problem wasn't solvable through the chaos of hope alone. Their dependence on me became more obvious with each strategic recommendation I offered, with each calculated move I made to protect their assets. Tyler, still oblivious, wandered through discussions with ideas and excuses, expecting the world to adapt, and I began to notice something else. Something I hadn't expected, a subtle change in their language. Where once they had dismissed me, now they referred to plans I implemented as Madison's suggestions or her idea. Not gratitude, not acknowledgement, but a creeping recognition of influence. The shift wasn't loud and it wasn't celebrated. It was quiet, almost invisible. But it was real. In those moments, I understood a critical lesson. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, built on competence, patience, and foresight. By staying disciplined, by building my life independent of their chaos. I had positioned myself as the one who could steer the ship when storms hit. I left New Jersey that weekend with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The house would survive. My parents would survive. Tyler, well, he would survive in his own way because he had no other choice. And I had survived everything they, and especially my father, had told me about my limits. I had survived being dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, and for the first time, I realized the unspoken truth. One day the tables would turn. One day my father would have to face me not as the child he dismissed, but as the person who quietly outbuilt him, outmaneuvered the chaos, and created a life and influence he could no longer ignore. And when that day came, the power wouldn't just shift, it would tilt completely in my favor. The city was mine, not literally. Of course I didn't own Manhattan, but for the first time, I had control over my own time, my own resources, my own trajectory. Every morning I walked past skyscrapers with a quiet sense of rightness. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I wasn't seeking attention or praise. I was building a life so solid that no one's opinion could shake it. Not even my father's. I had secured a position as a financial analyst at a firm with a reputation for strict standards and little tolerance for error. It wasn't glamorous in the sense of flashy titles or lavish perks, but it was pure opportunity. Every spreadsheet I balanced, every portfolio I analyzed, every presentation I delivered became another layer of competence that no one could deny. I worked long hours, invested wisely, saved obsessively. Each dollar I earned, each decision I made reinforced the independence that had always been my secret rebellion. Meanwhile, back home, Tyler's trajectory continued its predictable decline. His next venture, a small tech startup, burned through seed money faster than he could pitch it. My parents, ever willing to bail him out, were now juggling credit card debt, unpaid bills, and tense conversations with lenders. Every phone call I received from my father was thinly veiled panic. Every conversation with my mother laced with worry and faint guilt. I didn't intervene immediately. I watched, quietly noting patterns, waiting for the right moment to act. There was a strange satisfaction in observing the consequences of years of poor judgment and favoritism. But I didn't delight in their suffering. I simply knew that the imbalance had created an opportunity for me to assert control. Eventually, by the time I hit my late 20s, I had grown into a different version of myself than the child my father dismissed. I wasn't just competent. I was decisive. I wasn't just disciplined. I was strategic. I had built a portfolio of investments that gave me financial freedom, established a network of mentors and colleagues who recognized my skill, and cultivated a reputation for solving problems quietly but effectively. Then came the tipping point. One Friday evening, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying tension. "We need to talk," she said. "About Tyler and the house." When I drove out that weekend, I found the situation worse than I'd had anticipated. Tyler had made yet another reckless decision. A partnership gone wrong, money vanished, contracts unsigned. My parents were scrambling, overwhelmed, exhausted. And this time, they had no clear plan. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out my notebook, and began running the numbers. Mortgage, loans, bills, expenses, potential solutions. My father, who had dismissed my abilities for decades, leaned over my shoulder, watching silently as I worked. My mother peeked occasionally, her hope tethered to my calculations rather than her son's promises. Tyler paced the room, offering excuses, half-hearted explanations, and ideas that only compounded the problem. I finally looked up. "Here's what we do," I said. Clear, concise, unflinching. "We consolidate what we can, cut losses where necessary, and create a plan that protects the house and your finances. Tyler will have boundaries this time. No more bailouts. No more credit lines." My father's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to dismiss me as he always had, but he couldn't. He saw the reality I laid out in front of him. Numbers, projections, consequences, all mapped, all concrete. My mother nodded slowly, realizing that the person who had been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated for decades was now the one holding the key to stability. That night, I stayed late, finalizing spreadsheets, negotiating with lenders, recalculating budgets. Tyler sulked, my parents watched with cautious trust, and I realized something profound. I was no longer the child who needed approval. I was the adult with the power to shape outcomes. The next morning, my father finally spoke, the first time in years that he looked me square in the eye without condescension. I didn't realize," he said, voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. "I should have. I let it hang there. I didn't need to answer." The acknowledgement was in the numbers, the plan, and the calm authority I held over a situation they had thought uncontrollable. Power had shifted quietly, invisibly, but irreversibly. Tyler, of course, took none of it seriously. "You're too uptight," he said casually, leaning against the counter. "This is temporary. I'll figure something out." I looked at him and smiled faintly. "Not this time," I said. "This time we're doing it differently. Boundaries, accountability, consequences." And in that moment, I realized the full weight of what I had built, not just a career. Not just financial independence, but control over the dynamics that had once defined my life. The child my father said would never amount to anything was now the one who determined outcomes. The quiet observer, the careful planner, the invisible foundation, they were all in charge. For the first time, I felt an unshakable sense of power. Not arrogance, not revenge. Power that came from preparation, patience, and understanding patterns that others ignored. And I knew deep down that one day soon, my father would stand in my office, waiting for an answer. And everything would change. It was a Thursday afternoon when he finally came. My father, his shoulders slightly hunched. His suit ill-fitted, hands clasped nervously in front of him, stood in my office, staring at the skyline through the glass windows. He had never looked so small and so unsure, not in all the years he had dictated what I could or couldn't do. Not in all the moments he had dismissed me, called me useless, or told me I'd never amount to anything. I need to talk," he said finally, voice strained, trying to reclaim authority that no longer existed. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on him, hands resting casually on the desk. "You need to talk?" I asked. "Or you need help?" He swallowed. Tyler, the house, everything. I don't know what to do anymore. You've built all of this, and I feel lost." I didn't rise from my seat. I didn't apologize. I simply let him feel the weight of his own miscalculations. For decades, he had wielded words like weapons, belittling me, undermining me, shaping a narrative that I was weak, incapable, insignificant. And now, standing here, he realized the reality. The person he had ignored and underestimated controlled the outcome. "I've built systems," I said slowly, clearly letting each word land. "Budgets, portfolios, boundaries. I've secured the house, the finances, and my career. Tyler's choices no longer threaten stability because I've put measures in place. The world doesn't reward excuses or favoritism, it rewards preparation and execution. That's what I've done." His eyes flickered toward the cityscape beyond the glass, as if the skyline itself had become a mirror reflecting everything he had missed. I didn't see it before," he admitted quietly. I didn't recognize how much you've accomplished." I let it hang. No words of reassurance, no softened tones. This was a moment of acknowledgement earned through years of discipline, patience, and unseen labor. Power had shifted, and he had to face it whether he liked it or not. Tyler, of course, wandered in mid-conversation, still casual, still believing the world owed him credit. "Hey, so, are we?" I cut him off with a calm but firm tone. "No, Tyler, not this time. The rules have changed. Boundaries are set. Responsibilities are real. If you want help, it comes with conditions. Accountability first. Excuses second. Results only." He blinked, caught off guard, unused to anyone speaking with authority over him, especially me. My father glanced at me. Realizing that I wasn't just asserting power over Tyler, I was commanding it in a way that left him silent, watching. And aware of the reality he had ignored for decades, I walked him through the financial structure I had created, mortgage reorganized, savings secured, retirement protected, debt managed. Step by step, I laid out the safeguards I had implemented, the contingencies and the boundaries. By the time I finished, both my father and Tyler understood, not theoretically, not emotionally, but practically, that I was the one in control. For the first time, my father looked at me without a hint of condescension. His pride, his stubbornness, his dismissiveness, all of it was gone, replaced by a reluctant admiration. I can't believe how far you've come," he said finally, voice thick with emotion. You really did it." I nodded, letting the words settle. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I had to survive, and because I wanted to ensure stability for you, for Tyler, and for myself. I've been underestimated my whole life." "Not anymore." My mother, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "You've saved us, Madison. I don't know how to thank you enough." I let her words wash over me, but I knew the real satisfaction wasn't in gratitude. It was in the quiet, undeniable shift. The child my father dismissed was now the one who held the power, determined the outcomes, and controlled the fate of the family's most pressing concerns. Tyler, finally understanding the reality, muttered, I guess I should start listening." I didn't respond. I simply smiled faintly. The lesson had been long and quiet, but the message was crystal clear. Authority and respect are earned through action. Patience and skill, not birthright. Favoritism or empty promises. That day, I walked out of the office feeling a calm I had never known. Not arrogance. Not vengeance. Power earned and undeniable. I had proven beyond any doubt, but the child who was told she'd never amount to anything had become the one who determined what everyone else could, or couldn't do. And in that quiet victory, I realized the final truth. It wasn't just about power. It was about reclaiming my life, asserting my worth, and finally stepping fully into the role I had been preparing for all along. What would you do if someone in your family underestimated you your whole life? Comment below and let us know your story. If you thought Madison's story ended here, wait till you hear what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss it.